what is the actual practicing aspect of Greek polytheism?
What we are doing is we're following the path that so many ancient Greeks have done, which is look out into nature like we are right now. What the Christian propaganda, especially in the earlier times, has done. We're talking about the ancient Greeks, honoring them for democracy, for the arts, for literature. They got everything right but religion.
Mr. George Lizos, a man who is practicing priest of Greek polytheism. How do you deal with these conflicts that are there in mythology? Do you choose a god over the others?
There's a difference between mythology and theology. I need real connection with the gods.
What is your perspective on the historical reality of Greek homosexuality?
When it comes to homosexuality in ancient Greece, it existed, but not in the same context we perceive it today. So there was gay sex, and there were homoerotic relationships as well. There wasn't gay marriage.
Hello everyone, this is Michael from Ancient Greece Revisited, and we're back with another interview. I know many of you have been inquiring into the practical aspects of Greek paganism, Greek religion, of Greek devotion. And I know we've been tackling the theoretical aspect, and a lot of you have asked, what about the practical? So I'm very happy to introduce you to a man who is a practicing author and priest of Greek polytheism, Mr. George Lizos, author of Secrets of Greek Mysticism. So we're here to discuss his book and what is the actual practicing aspect of Greek polytheism. George, welcome. Very happy that you're here with us.
Michael.
I know that you have contacted us, you saw our show. I guess you enjoyed it enough to come into contact, so
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here to chat about the book, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing, like disseminating all the wisdom of the ancient Greeks on your channel.
Thank you very much. I am always interested, but also a little weary about this practicing side.
Yeah.
We know we have the ancient texts, we have the hymns, we have the myths, and we have the works of philosophy and poetry that build on them. But we also know that the line from the ancient priesthood till today has been cut, has been severed. So whenever someone comes and claims to be a priest, I'm always very interested on one side and a little weary. But we did speak over the internet with the other half of Ancient Greece Revisited, Adam, and you won me over. I was convinced that you have something important to say. So with light touches, like how does one reconcile the fact that the line has been broken for so many centuries, and how can one claim to be able to bridge that gap from the last priests of Eleusis, perhaps in the late Roman times, till today?
That's a very good question, because there is so many people who practice the ancient Greek religion from a reconstructionist perspective, and therefore they are following the text of what happened in the past, and they're taking that and they're reconstructing it. Now, the difference of what I'm doing along with the organization, which is the official carrier of the Hellenic polytheistic religion in the modern times, is that instead of reconstructing the past, we're evolving the past. So yes, the line has been cut, but rather it went underground, because when Christianity took over, the religion was still practiced, but it went underground. And there has been continuation with breaks, of course, because that's just how life works. And therefore, ever since the Greek state legalized Hellenic polytheism as an official religion in 2017, more and more groups have been coming on the surface. We can now perform weddings, we can now like do all the official ceremonies and just register ourselves as Hellenic polytheists. And therefore, we've been evolving the religion by taking and basing what we know from the ancient texts and also adjusting it to a modern context. For example, whereas in the ancient times they used to sacrifice animals, we've evolved away from that, and now we only offer grains and different kind of liquids to the gods rather than sacrifice animals, and many other ways. Let's say for example, the wheel of the year. In the ancient times, every single city-state had their own wheel of the year, and therefore the festivals that they celebrated month after month, focusing on their connection with the earth. So what we have done now, we've taken those calendars and we've created a common calendar that all Greeks or anyone can really use to really partner with the earth and honor the gods and the energies of this universe through this calendar. Because at the end of the day, this is a religion based on our connection with the earth. And that connection can never be severed. The practices can be discontinued for some time, but our connection with the environment, our connection with the earth, that can never be severed. And that's something that the ancient Greeks taught, and it's something that we've been doing knowingly or not.
So to go back and challenge this, so you have been ordained a priest,
Yes.
By someone else, and what is involved to become a priest
Yes.
of Greek polytheism?
So when I found out in 2017 that the Supreme Council of Hellenic polytheists were running their first ever legal priesthood training, I booked my ticket. I was living in London at the time. I booked my ticket to Athens, and I got like a 3-day intensive training where you become a priest trainee. During that time, what I did was go through a series of theoretical training and therefore learning a lot about the basics, the foundations of the ancient Greek religion, which is based on the ancient texts, particularly Orphism, but there's like more different philosophical schools involved as well, and religious texts. And then there was a practical component as well. What they've done, instead of reconstructing the past, we've used what we know of how the ancient Greeks practiced the religion in the past, and we've created ceremonies that are aligned with that, but also evolving it. So I got my practical training, I got my theoretical training, but that only established me as a trainee. And therefore, since then, I've been practicing at the modern temple of Zeus that we have in Cyprus with the other members of the community. So month after month, over the past at least 5 years, I've been practicing and building on my knowledge. At the same time, doing a lot of research and reading on my own to really educate myself. And also doing a lot of research when it comes to like embodying my connection with the different gods and goddesses, going out in temples, meditating, and seeing what comes up, and really establishing that relationship. So for me, becoming a priest is not just a matter of just doing a short course and poof, I'm a priest. It's a lifelong journey of my connection with the earth, my connection with the gods, and what I can learn while respecting the ancient Greek tradition.
But there is some kind of curriculum, there's
Yes.
some kind of structure, and that structure was created by the council.
Yes.
Which I was not aware it existed, funnily enough. So I guess we need to go a step back into that council. Like, talk to us about the council. When was it founded? By whom? Under what conditions? And the Greek name, I like the Greek name, is, you taught me, είπα το Συμβούλιο Ελλήνων Εθνικών.
Yes.
So High Council of Greek Nationals.
So the English translation, the way they've defined it, is a Supreme Council of Ethnic Hellenes.
Ethnic Hellenes. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, I guess, to clarify a little bit, because ethnic, national doesn't mean we have a, I guess, restricted view of what a nation is in our modern age, because we have nation states. And nation states have a line around the sand, as they say, and they say inside is the nation state and outside is something else. but obviously Greeks living in Cyprus, Greeks living in other countries are also part of the Greek nation. And then there is a historical perspective, and one idea is that when Greece was liberated from the Turkish rule, it wasn't necessarily like the name Greece was not necessarily the name that this new country would take. And back in Byzantium, I think the word Greeks, Hellenes, was mostly reserved for the people who were practicing the old ways in a certain sense. So I guess the name implies that we're not doing something foreign, we're doing something very, very Greek. Okay, but what's the history of this council?
So I don't know exactly the history, but people can find all the information when they go online. But what I do know is that there was a discussion around choosing the right term to use. Indigenous was something that was discussed. Pagan was something that was discussed as well. Polytheism was something that was discussed as well. Of course, in Greek, we use the term dodekatheismos, which basically means like 12 gods. But all these terms were rejected, and instead they chose ethnic for certain reasons that I don't want to get into right now. But essentially, it covers what you're just talking about. Like it accepts everyone who has a Greek history, and they accept the journey of Greeks through the years.
Yeah, again, I like, I always liked, true to our show, be very skeptical and always push back.
Yeah.
If indeed, and I've spoken because of our work, we've been meeting a lot of people who are into the practical side of paganism, like I opened up this episode, and their idea, and it's an idea that I respect, although it has to be taken with a grain of salt, is that when the line is broken and you can't go back, so, one of my next questions would be, so you've been ordained a priest by someone, I guess this someone has also been ordained a priest by someone else who approved them. And just like in the Christian church, the line of priests goes back to essentially the 12 apostles, right? There's no other way. Every priest, every Christian priest in the world is like branches to a tree that go back, and there's this unified continuous history. But with Greek polytheism, as I'm sure with other forms of, like, I guess even Nordic polytheism, the line has been severed, and some people who are practicing polytheists told me that because of that, the only way is to perform a kind of spiritual jump through meditation and through other spiritual practices where you connect back to what these people connected without this line, right? So is that along the lines of what you are saying as well?
Not 100%. There is an element of personal connection, but what the religion does is they're basing the practice on the ancient Greek texts because we have enough information as to the foundations of the religion that we're basing the practices. At the same time, though, even though the line has been cut, although there is debate around whether it has been cut or whether it just went underground and therefore it's just now resurfacing, because that's a whole different other question. But let's take things to the foundations. What are all pagan religions? What is the ancient Greek religion? It's how people relate with the earth and how people label the different energies and the laws of the universe. Because when you think about the Greek gods and goddesses, they're universal laws and functions. Those never change. The Norse religion, the Celtic religion, all the different pagan religions, based on their own temperament, based on their own relationship with the earth, they've given different names and characteristics to those laws. The Egyptians called the god of the sun Ra, for example. The Greeks called him Apollo. They're essentially the same laws. So what stops us from having that connection with the earth? What we are doing is we're following the path that so many ancient Greeks have done, which is look out into nature like we are right now and see, how do I feel when I have this interaction with the earth? How do I feel when the sun rises? How do I feel during the summer solstice? I'm observing the nature, the journey of the earth around the sun and how that affects the earth. And I'm making conclusions. So at the end of the day, at the very basis, that's what it is. Then you have some history, some texts that you follow, and you're adding, of course, because we don't have all the information, a lot of information has sadly been lost. We're complementing with modern practices to make it work based on the modern life. What I don't like and what I'm not a big fan of is reconstructing ancient Greek practices in the form of a play, for example.
Which looks more like theater.
Yes,
than, yeah.
that's not what
So
this is.
you and people in the council, you're going for an authentic experience.
Yes.
And are you getting this experience? Because many people listening
Yeah.
are very thirsty of a spiritual experience. I've met people. I am, to some degree, one of them. I've been very thirsty for spiritual experiences. And in a previous interview, I spoke how, fortunately / unfortunately, the path that I found most direct was through the use of psychedelics.
Yes.
And for better or worse, in this case, you get an experience. It's hard to comprehend and unpack, but it's a real experience, a very, very, very real experience. You know, there's a famous poet of psychedelics called Terence McKenna, and he was saying how he went through various practices. He was one of the 60s generation. You know, he traveled to India, he followed gurus, did meditation, did all sorts of various practices, special diets, special fasting. And he said, but psychedelics were real. You get an experience. With everything else, you don't know whether you're fooling yourself.
Yeah.
Are these practices leading to the experience?
Yeah, I want to share a funny story here, because psychedelic is a powerful tool and when used like with caution and with guidance. But my practice, especially when it comes to like writing Secrets of Greek Mysticism, aside of my own personal reading that I've done, my own meditation practice, my spiritual practice, doing the festival every single month, doing a new moon ritual, a full moon ritual, and I talk all about that in the book. But when I decided to write the book, I'm like, I need real connection with the gods, aside from just that. So I call my best friend, who's not a pagan, he's from the Czech Republic, and I'm like, Sargis, how about we go on a temple hopping trip to Greece? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you know how college students go bar hopping, club hopping? We're just gonna go temple hopping. So we came to Athens for a 15-day trip. So we rented a car, we went to the ancient Agora, we went to Sunion to like meditate with Poseidon, we went to Delphi, we went to Olympia, we went all around Greece, visited more than 15 temples. And what we've done during that process, at every temple, I had my dowsing rods with me, and I would ask the god or goddess of that temple, like, guide me, where do you want me to meditate? And I would find the right spot, an energetic spot, because the temples, they're portals, they hold powerful energy. So we would find the right spot, I would make an offering to the god, like grains, for example, or flowers, and then we would sit there, meditate, get into a trance state, receive guidance, and then I had my journal with me and I would take notes. Specifically in Delphi, I went into a very deep trance state, very similar to what a psychedelic could do, for example. And I started channeling like mudras, like hand movements with my hands. And I'm like, Sargis, just film me. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was just moving my hands in a very specific way. And then when I meditated with the energies of the temple, they told me, okay, we're giving you these tools. They're going to help you deepen your intuition more. And I've been using them and teaching them as well when it comes to deepening my intuition. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with the religion. That's my own personal practice. But to answer your question, yes, both the festivals that I've been doing daily, monthly, as well as this practice have allowed me to deepen my connection with the gods and get that authentic spiritual experience that I'm talking about.
So did you have a trance state in Delphi,
Yeah.
similar, comparable to that of psychedelics, you believe?
I don't think so. I haven't done psychedelics,
Okay,
so I cannot compare the experience.
Okay.
I've only gone as much as doing weed.
Okay.
And that gave me like a drug-induced psychosis, so I'm not gonna go there.
Oh, good choice. But okay, it's interesting because I am also very curious.
Yeah.
I've done various practices, and I guess one thing that I have shared and I'd like to share again. It's very hit and miss I'm a skeptic, and being a skeptic means you're skeptical of everything. You're skeptical of modern science as much as ancient spirituality, you know. And my guide as a skeptic is practical.
Yeah.
Does this give me the juice, you know? And I've done a couple of practices, and it's interesting how, you know, you can pay for a seminar in Reiki and be around people who are very convinced that they feel something,
Yeah.
and you feel nothing. And you're like, you know, you're going to go out and you're going to be the only crazy person in the room because everyone felt it, you know, you can't even ask
Yeah.
for your money back. And then again, I've been put into a trance. I've shared part of this experience by an Indian and Hindu musician back in London, and it was very, very real, and it was very intentional
Yeah.
on his part. It wasn't. It was something spontaneous. It was something that happened. He was talking about various things. I didn't believe it. He did it, and I was like, wow. And having done psychedelics, I can say that it was very comparable. It was like a small dose, maybe, you know, like something like 20-30% of a psychedelic trip, but it was there. It had that quality. It had that wow quality, otherworldly, out of body for a few seconds. Very powerful. And he seemed to do it effortlessly.
Yeah.
So there is truth to a lot of these things, and there's a lot of lies as well. And I think the physical experience is how I go about
Yeah.
separating it.
And talking about the physical experience, I mean, trance states are powerful. I'm a hypnosist myself, so I do hypnosis, and I know how powerful that can be. But something that I talk about in the book as well is building up altars in honor of the gods and to honor nature. And there's something powerful about altars because they have been used by cultures all around the world ever since the beginning of time, ever since we have evidence. And what is an altar? It's a bridge between the profane and the sacred. It transforms the space. A sacred space is a defined space. So you define a space where you tell the gods, you tell the universe, I want this space to be a portal of communication with you. So help me do that. So by setting up the altar, setting up whether you want to put figurines of the gods or whether you want to put anything you find out in nature, of course, with respect to nature, and just make it your own, make it so that it helps you find that state of connection through daily spiritual practice, through the rituals. You don't go into like a trance state, although you could, but you have a daily contact with the divine. Why did the ancients use candles, fire, and smoke? Because they alter consciousness. When you think of smoke, it's so ethereal. When you think of fire, it transports you somewhere. It's almost magical when you see it. So they put you into a state through the smell of the incense, through the practice of reciting an Orphic hymn that has been recited by so many people through the past. It awakens something within you. It connects you with that frequency, and you feel something. And it's small, but with consistency, it adds up. It builds up and gives you that daily connection with the God, not just this one-off experience where you're in a trance state, for example. It becomes a daily connection.
In talking about practices, talking about rituals, you've written a book where you go over the gods one by one. And we know, and since antiquity, there's been it's mentioned in one of the Socratic dialogues, Ephthifro by name. It's been discussed how the gods are part of the same pantheon. Pious Greek back in ancient Athens would honor all the gods, but in myth, the gods also fought against each other.
Yes.
They had quarrels against each other. So you are worshipping something that is quarreling between itself. Do you choose a god over the others? Do you identify with a god? And how do you deal with these conflicts that are there in mythology,
That's my favorite question because that's why I chose to write this book. Every time I would tell people I'm a Greek polytheist, I'm like, how can you believe in gods that fight with one another, that are jealous of one another? And everybody tells me, oh my God, I love Greek mythology. And whereas I love hearing that, it also triggered me because there is a difference between mythology and theology. The myths were written by highly spiritual people, usually in the mystery schools, as allegories holding important information about the Greek gods and goddesses. They're not to be taken literally. They're meant to be interpreted in a symbolic, allegorical way. So, for example, in the apple, the golden apple of...
Apolleus.
Yes. So the golden apple symbolizes the world. It's golden because the world has so much potential. And then the goddesses fighting for the apple symbolizes of the goddesses gifting gifts to the earth. And then Paris, who was a human, of course, chose Aphrodite as the winner because as a human, he can only see what he can see. He cannot see beyond. So there's a message, there's an allegory behind the myth. So what I've intended to do in the book is not talk about the gods from a mythological standpoint, but talk about the gods from a theological standpoint. Ares, for example, the god of war. Everybody's like, how can you believe in Ares? He's a god of war. I'm like, he was a god of war in a context when that was really important. Really, the virtues, because I talk about the virtues of the gods, the ethical philosophy aspect of the gods. Ares' two virtues are bravery and courage. So Ares is about the bravery and courage to stand up for yourself and others. What's happening when you're out and about and you get attacked by someone, when you see someone getting attacked? Are you going to just sit there and send them love and light? No, you're going to fight back. You're going to protect yourself. You're going to stand up for other people. So sometimes the most loving thing you can do is fight. So Ares' combative energy sometimes is needed because that's the only thing you can do. Do you see like how you interpret and approach the gods from a different perspective?
No, absolutely. And you're talking about something that's kind of dear to our hearts. I mean, our last episode was about a great psychoanalyst called James Hillman, who's been also an inspiration to the show. And James Hillman wrote a book on Ares, essentially, called A Terrible Love for War. And he showed how in the human experience, war, the most terrible of things, when war rises in the human experience, when you actually witness it, when you don't just see the number and say how many thousands have been killed, say in Ukraine, unfortunately, which is terrible, but when you're there, apparently, and experience it, there's something sublime, there's something beautiful about this experience, said so not by me, but by people who were actually there, fighting. When napalm would explode, some soldiers would say, it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. And that's not even to be debated, that's not to be criticized, it's how it appeared to them. So in a Greek polytheistic way, we could say that the aftermath of war is terrible, but when Ares walks the earth, he walks with a certain beauty.
So the ancient Greeks talked about ethical war, ethical warfare. This is a political theory that has started, I believe, from ancient Greece, and it has been talked about recently as well, which has to do with protecting yourself. So what you're just saying makes sense in the sense that when you're fighting for something. It's that for something, that reason, that gives you the wherewithal. That's the energy of Ares. When you believe in something and you fight for it, it gives you that adrenaline, that rush, that sense of purpose that transforms your experience. And that is Ares' energy, which when you just take the myth of Ares and see what he's done, you don't understand that. You just see a god who's cruel, and that's not what it is. And interestingly, Aphrodite was the only one who could stop Ares. And that shows that love is the only thing that can stop war. The ancient Greeks...
There's a connection to the two.
There's a connection, of course, mythologically as well as theologically, because the two are connected. Mythology draws from theology, but theology does not draw from mythology. In Sparta, they had statues of chained Ares. They would basically chain Ares down, the statue, and that symbolizes that we want to bring peace into our land.
In Sparta, no less, a warlike nation like no other, right?
Exactly. I find that so fascinating.
It's
and
inspiring,
of course,
yes.
It's inspiring, and we don't hear about the chained Ares statues because that's not fun. We want to hear about wars, and therefore these are the hymns that get so much traction.
But is there also a personal connection to a specific god? Do you find that people who practice Greek polytheism have an affinity to a specific god?
We all have our guardian gods, and in the book I have a meditation to meet your guardian god. Now, what do I mean by that? A guardian god, from my perspective, is a god, and let's remind ourselves that the gods, they are universal laws and functions. It's that universal law and function that you need more of throughout your life, and those who believe in reincarnation throughout your many lives, guiding your mission, your soul's mission. For example, my guardian god is Apollo, because his energy, his frequency has a lot of the information that I need to move forward with my purpose. But we also have gods and goddesses that come to us at different times of our lives based on what lessons we need to learn. For many years, I was working a lot and very closely with Aphrodite, because I was working on accepting myself, my relationship with my body, my sexuality, etc. And once I fulfilled that mission, then I move on to something else. However, what's really important to note is that we honor all the gods because it's all about being holistic. Mm-hmm. The Greek wheel of the year that follows the changing of the seasons around the earth, in each festival, in each month, we celebrate a god or a goddess, like 12 months, 12 gods. And their counterpart, their male or female counterpart, because it's important to honor the whole of us. There is, especially in the New Age community that I've been part of for many years, there's a lot of talk around the divine feminine or the goddess. Yes, the divine feminine has been suppressed for so many years as a result of patriarchy. But let's not forget the masculine. I believe that for the divine feminine to truly rise, the divine masculine has to rise as well.
It's definitely something that we're also banging the drum on. Yeah, because it's true. We had a lot of episodes about the divine feminine, going back to Minoan Crete, and obviously patriarchal culture like the ancient Greeks suppressed that for sure. But I find, and that's a topic that I would love to segue into now that you mentioned it. I find also a lot of naivety surrounding these energies. So talking about the divine feminine, because we have inherited a world that is patriarchal, there's no doubt about it. As much as I am against, the woke culture that wants to name everything it dislikes patriarchal, I am fully aware that the world that we inherited in the West is patriarchal. There's no way around it, and there's no contradiction between the two. So I guess starting from the 1960s, perhaps sex, love, and rock and roll, the feminine aspect of that culture has been privileged little by little. And I find there's a lot of naivety there because unfortunately, and because it has been suppressed for so long, the image that men were left with was very naive of what a woman truly is. It's almost like we haven't really met woman in her full potential and have been left with a fantasy. And with every woman, and with definitely every divine feminine, there's at least two sides. There's a motherly, there's three sides at least. There's a erotic, core,
yes,
kind of young girl, maiden aspect. The glistening of the hair under the sun, kind of, startling eyes. And then there's a motherly, there's an earth nourishing, giving away her energy to back into new life. And then there's a dark Kali aspect of
the crone.
Yeah, of eating up what she gave.
Yes.
And it's that last aspect that's the most misunderstood. So what I find is that the divine feminine that is perhaps coming back, and we did have a few episodes of that, is also bringing back this Kali energy, and people are very naive about it.
Yes.
Is this telling you something?
Yes. First of all, a note on terms. When I speak about the divine feminine and masculine, I like to differentiate it from sex, and gender, because we have gender, we have sex, we have sexuality, and then we have divine feminine, divine masculine, which from my perspective, they're energies that exist within all spheres of sex, gender, and sexuality. Now, what you talked about, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, is something that I talk about in the book in the chapter about Hera, because when you look at the epithets of Hera, there is the epithet of Hera Hiri, which basically is a crone. You talked about the Gore, which is another epithet about maiden, and then there is another epithet about her being a mother. So what I love about working with pagan traditions in general is that they honor all aspects of the divine feminine. Talking about, for example, Aphrodite, she's been packaged as the goddess of love, beauty, and sex. Now, when you look at love from this very superficial spiritual perspective of, oh, love is just divine love, and it's this oneness that you feel with the gods. That is one aspect of love, but Aphrodite considers all expressions of love equal. Sexual love, sensual love, flirtatious love, self-love, as well as divine love. That's why we have Urania Aphrodite, Philomidis Aphrodite, Pandemos Aphrodite, because those are the different aspects of divine feminine. So when you take all the goddesses from the Greek pantheon, and they're not just like 6, they're like hundreds, if not thousands, as many as there are universal laws, and you take their epithets, in the way that they were described and identified by the ancient Greeks, those are all expressions of the divine feminine. And I think that's one of my favorite things about Hellenic polytheism, is the multiplicity, is their relationship with nature and realizing that nature is balanced. We are not because of patriarchy, but when we turn to nature, we find all aspects of the divine masculine and of the divine feminine in nature perfectly balanced. We have autumn and winter, and nature is in a divine feminine state. It's passive, but not really. It's still working underground, producing, generating. And then we have the divine masculine aspect of nature during the spring and the summer months, where it's all changing. We're also part of nature as well. Why are we constantly working and overworking ourselves all year round? Why don't we give ourselves the grace to also find that balance between us? Because change comes from within, as we know. So patriarchy can only change if we change.
Do you feel that this concern with patriarchy has swung the other way? And
not yet, but I feel it is in the process of doing so. If you think about that patriarchy has been around for so many thousand years, it's gonna take a lot more for it to swing the other way.
But don't you think that masculinity to some degree has been demonized in the 20th and 21st century?
For sure. It has been demonized. I feel that masculine energy has been vilified, and we need to de-vilify it. And what I love about Greek polytheism is that we honor equally the male gods and the female deities. That's why on the altar, the ancient Greeks always had a male statue and a female statue. That's why the gods are genderless. We just give them a gender based on our understanding of what that energy is and the characteristics we've assigned to the masculine and the feminine energy. In essence, it's just energy. But there is a female or a male counterpart to every god. With Zeus, we have Dionysus. With Aphrodite, we have the Aphroditus. And on the altar,
and by the way, people listening, that's also an etymological connection that you made there, because Dias is Zeus, Diony
the female version.
Is the female version of the name of Zeus.
The name.
Aphrodite and Aphroditos is the male version. So we're not just talking Ares, Aphrodite, we're talking male versions of the same god.
Two sides of the same coin. Like, for example, in Cyprus, Aphrodite was venerated, but also Aphroditus, and there was a statue of Aphroditus with like breasts and a phallus.
Oh. And you have Hermaphroditus as well.
And Hermaphrodite, which is an offspring of Hermes and Aphrodite.
Talking about that, like that made me segue into yet another topic that's also dear and perhaps one of the most controversial, which is Greek homosexuality.
Yes.
Right? And it so happens that a couple of our last episodes revolved around Greek homosexuality. We talked about the sacred band of Thebes and we presented it as Plutarch and as Plato presents it as an army of lovers. And, I'm open to understanding that the term lovers, eraste, might have been different back in ancient Greece than today. But I'm not very open into dismissing all aspects of homosexuality just because people do not like it in the modern age. I think that the comments that we receive are usually on these episodes, and most of our episodes have been very, very well received. But this one was a bit of a shock because we found a great polarization, which is kind of driving us insane because I think Adam said it best. It's like, you can't win this, he said, because we live in an age where misgendering someone can be considered a thought crime, and yet you acknowledge that there was a practice of homosexuality, and you're also attacked for dirtying ancient Greece. It's like crazy. You can't win this way, you can't win the other way, and you can't find a balance. So what is your perspective on the historical reality of Greek homosexuality to start with?
Well, as a gay man myself, I have done a lot of thinking around that, and it's been like a passion project for me. And in one of my latest episodes in my own podcast, I did an episode about homosexuality in ancient Greece. So it's fresh in my mind. Now, when it comes to homosexuality in ancient Greece, it existed, but not in the same context we perceive it today, because the term gay and straight did not exist then. It was just something people did. So there was
It was not an identity.
It was not an identity. It was a practice. So you had a very common practice where in the way that homosexuality was expressed, was in the relationship between the teacher and the student, which of course now would be considered illegal, and it's still illegal and rightfully so. But back then, different context, it was pederastia. That was actually the term used, where a teacher would have a relationship with a student, and that relationship was not necessarily sexual. It was a mentorship, essentially. And as a result of their common bond, it could evolve into something sexual. There were also the symposia, where men, specifically in the aristocracy, they would come together to share poetry, art, talk with one another. That was another context that allowed for homosexual relationships to be established. So there was gay sex, and there were homoerotic relationships as well. There wasn't gay marriage, though, in ancient Greece.
That's pretty important. I knew it, but somehow I never made that connection.
Let me tell you why.
It's interesting, yeah.
Why? It has to do with the symbolism. And my religion, the organization that I'm part of, they also don't perform gay weddings, which I disagree with. It is what it is, and I will explain to you why and what my perspective is. The reason they weren't practiced, as much as I understand it, is that it has to do with symbolism. It had to match Hera and Zeus, the divine feminine, the divine masculine coming together. The theogamia, the sacred wedding that we celebrate as a festival in January, which is the partnership of the two genders, essentially. So that is what both the ancient and modern polytheists are using to not perform gay weddings, even though homosexuality is accepted within the religion. And I'm a gay practicing priest, and that's totally okay and acceptable. My perspective is, the religion is evolving based on modern context. In the same way we've evolved away from sacrificing animals and so many other things, we can also evolve to understand that the divine masculine and the divine feminine exist within everyone. Hera can exist within me, the same way that Zeus can exist within me. I can take the symbolism of Hera as much as I can take the symbolism of Zeus, and not have to stick to those dividing stereotypes.
Very interesting. And what you said, I don't know why, it awakened something in me. There was no gay marriage in ancient Greece. I don't know, I'll deconstruct it later. But another thing that I found also very interesting is that, for all the homoerotic tones that you find, not just in Plato, but in Xenophon, and in mythology, of course, as well, and many other writers. you don't have vulgar descriptions of
Yes.
sex. Even in comedy, there are some allusions, but you don't have something vulgar, which tells me that, yeah, the Greeks definitely saw something different in homoerotic relationships, something other than just pleasure. If it was just pleasure, they would have, there's a scene from Homer's Iliad where Hector, the Trojan warrior, comes back, almost like you come back from your daily job, honey, I'm home. He comes back from slaying some Greeks, and he's tired. And Homer, the poet, describes how his wife discovered, if you will, sexual position, ipasti, like horse riding, like, cow girl, kind of position,
Yeah.
so that he's not on top and he's not extra tired. And from the walls, from behind the curtains, the Phrygian servants were masturbating, and so Homer is very explicit when it comes to these heterosexual, almost pornographic in this case. But when it comes to, homoerotic, we have very few, if any, actual description, which is why scholars are so divided, because they can't find, was there, to be vulgar myself, was there anal penetration? They can't find this proof, so they're divided. But the lack of proof is a proof of something else.
Yes, and let's also remember that a lot has been lost. So there may exist something, but hasn't been discovered yet, or it's completely lost in history. But you touched on an important topic here, that even though there is no vulgar expressions, there is talk about love and relationships. And let's take the myth between Apollo and Hyacinthus, for example, which is all about love. It was Apollo, a god, falling in love with a mortal. They were playing the discus one day, accidentally, because he was so strong, killed his lover. And then he couldn't bear losing his lover, that he turned his blood into a flower that now symbolizes resurrection. So I mean, that alone melts me. I remember the first time I read it, I was a teenager. I'm like, oh my God, this is like, it touched me. So if a culture could produce something so sacred and beautiful as that touches people thousands of years afterwards, surely that meant something to the people as well.
It did, and you said something that's very true to my heart, because there's a beauty in Greek myths that's often forgotten, because people read it and hear it from a second or third hand. And when you go back and read it, and you have the ancient text, I'm not saying you have to read the ancient text verbatim, but you can bounce between a modern translation and an ancient and get a sense of that language. And there are just some scenes like the one you discovered, and which, despite what a lot of people may write in the comments, are lacking from other mythologies.
Yeah.
Other mythologies compared to Greeks are much more dry, and in Greek mythology, like, I remember you might read the Homeric hymn of Demeter and Persephone, and you might hear that the earth produced a flower, so that Persephone would try to pluck it and open the earth, and Hades comes up, and you miss the beauty when you actually read it. And there's this description of this flower that the earth produced that's almost like what some ethnologists call the axis mundi, like for that moment.
Yes.
It's like the whole, there's this sense in the poet, I don't remember the lyrics, but like the whole world revolved around this flower so much that even the gods almost look down from their clouds. So, imagine that scene, how beautiful. The earth produces a flower for a young girl to be seduced, but it's so beautiful that for a moment, even the gods were like, what did you do there? It's like, a moment of beauty like in very few other mythologies.
There is so much beauty, there is so much richness in Greek culture. The ancient Greeks undeniably created the foundations for so many different things. And something I always come back to, what the Christian propaganda, especially in the earlier times, has done and are still doing. we're talking about the ancient Greeks, honoring them for democracy, for the arts, for literature. They got everything right but religion. When it comes to religion, they knew nothing.
were
They honored
misled. Yes.
idols.
Yes.
But no, they
Illusions.
didn't.
Yeah.
They also had a basis, because when I tell people that what I do, what I practice, they think, but that's just like, it's just myths. Because we don't know the theological, the religious aspect of it, because we were taught that didn't exist. But it did. It's just hidden until now.
What would the Greek polytheistic answer be to a Christian if you had a Christian in front of you who criticized the fact that ancient Greeks had human-like gods?
Yes.
And that is somehow proof of their inferiority? What would an answer from that tradition would be?
I would compare it to the icons that the Orthodox Christians do, for example, and have, and any other physical representation of the saints, of Jesus or Mary, for example. Because we're human beings, we like compartmentalizing energy into something we can see and touch. We like naming things so that we can have a relationship with that. So in the same way that, let's say, for example, the icons or any paintings of Jesus or Mary are used as a way of establishing that connection with them, in the same way, the ancient Greeks and still the modern polytheist Greeks, we use statues or different other figurines or images to create that personal relationship with a god. Another question that I'm asked often, which is related to this one, is even like scholars on ancient Greeks, they're like, the ancient Greeks had a transactional relationship with the gods. It was all about, I'm giving you something, so you give me your grace. They didn't. Of course, many people who weren't deeply into the religion had a transactional relationship. But really, the gods and the goddesses, they couldn't care less about our offerings or libations or whether we portray them with a statue or not. The God's grace is always given. We don't have a transactional relationship with the gods. We need those offerings or those statues or the libations to feel a connection with the gods. The gods don't care. The grace is always there. The light has come. It's just a matter of, are we allowing ourselves to receive it? And by having those practices, by having representations of the gods as statues, by having all these rituals and the offerings, we create a way for us as humans who like compartmentalizing everything to connect with the gods.
I wanted to ask you a question on the gods for some reason that we're still trying to understand. Some of our most popular episodes, although we've done a great interview on the goddess Artemis, we've done an episode on Ares and the connection with Aphrodite. The episodes that are really the most popular have to do with Dionysus.
Yes.
And Dionysus is a really weird one to connect. Yeah. For starters, he was not part of the 12 gods. And that tells you something about his position. He was almost a demigod in a way. There was rituals where he was killed and reborn, but his position, although hierarchically lower, in the minds and hearts of the ancient Greeks, and as it appears in the minds and hearts of moderns, is not lower, is dare I say, sometimes higher. So what's the position of Dionysus specifically, and why do you think he's becoming popular today?
Interesting question. Because as you said, he's not part of the 12 gods. And the reason he's not part of the 12 gods, because every time I tell people I have this book, I'm like, I'm excited to read about Hades and Dionysus. And I'm like, they're not included. Because Dionysus specifically, he's a new god at the time, because he came way afterwards. And it really represented the relationship that people had with one another. And that's why the mysteries of Dionysus were sometimes very sexual, and they had to do with celebration, and they're very, very mystical. in the same way that the Eleusinian mysteries, for example, were like mystical experiences, the Dionysian mysteries as well were so like deeply
And definitely connected,
mystical.
I think.
Definitely connected, yes.
Dionysus did play a part in the Eleusinian
Yes.
mysteries, for sure.
The reason that I believe Dionysus is so popular right now is because of all the sexual orgies that are reference to what happened.
Very prosaic, but I think very accurate point.
I mean, let's face it, it's like sex else. Dionysus was not all about that, but that was part of the whole process.
Or, yeah, perhaps it's the part that
Yes.
people see today, because it was definitely much, much more than...
It was much more than just that. But it's that aspect of being human and celebrating your humanity and celebrating your body, which was very opposite to Apollo, for example. They two represented
Yes,
opposites.
different sides, the Apollonian and the Dionysiac, for sure.
And there is a beautiful painting we have in Cyprus. It's basically a fresco in Paphos that has Apollo and Dionysus and it showcases that contrast where you have
An
Apollo.
ancient one.
An ancient one.
Okay.
Where you have Apollo, for example, symbolizing the this high-level harmony of the universe and everything is perfect and flows with one
Mental,
another.
a little abstract, a little cold, perhaps.
Yes.
Ordered, the ordered understanding of the world.
The order, the harmony of the world,
Yes.
everything is like
Classical
organized.
music is Apollonian.
There we go.
Yeah.
And then you have Dionysus, embrace your body, embrace your
Drums.
emotions. Exactly. It's primal.
Rock and roll, yeah.
Both are needed. Let's not sacrifice one for the other. Let's not just dedicate ourselves to the spiritual act. Let's celebrate our body.
For sure. I'm just curious why, like Dionysus is so high. Like drawing this great conversation to a conclusion, because you talked about Christianity, and I do know that a lot of people who will go and reconnect with Greek paganism have a little bit of a grudge against Christianity. And I guess I understand part of it. I went to a religious school myself. If you were to ask me right when I finished school, I would tell you Christianity is responsible for all ills in the Western world. I've changed views since then, but I understand the position.
Yeah.
I feel that today, what's even more crucial is not paganism against Christianity, but paganism against atheism.
Yes.
What I find difficult, like wrapping up, everything we've said, from psychedelics, meditation, your connection, the missing line, what I find very difficult is that I feel we live in a very prosaic age, a very unpoetic age, a very disenchanted age. And I don't just think it's us. I think it's something in the air. I think hard for me to deconstruct it, but it's not that people have been taught that the gods do not exist and we have to go back and teach them otherwise. I think there's something in the air. I think that the age, the time, the stars are aligned against anyone who's trying to hear the gods sing again. Am I saying something to you?
Yes. And I do understand what you're talking about Christianity, because I grew up Christian as well. Now, my perspective on Christianity and all religions is that I believe there are many paths to source, whatever you want to call source. And they're all different maps. And I believe that all the maps lead to the same destination. And it's just a matter for people to find the map that works for them and follow that map to it. Greek paganism is one map. Christianity is a different map. I believe they're all valid. The problem is when we believe we don't need a map, which is what atheism is all about.
Or there's no source.
Or there's no source.
Most importantly.
Yes, which I respect. I do understand.
It makes sense, is what I was saying. It makes sense from a rational perspective, but it's
worrying.
Yeah.
Because that means, to me, what it means is that we've lost our connection with the earth. We've lost our connection with the universe. Because you wake up, you see the sunrise. It's the most magical thing that you can ever see. When you lose that connection with what's happening around you and you don't realize there is divinity, there is consciousness in that, then that's sad.
How do you break that disenchantment? I guess what I was trying to say before is that this disenchantment is not just the lack of something, it's almost like an active force disenchanting the world. if it makes sense?
I think people are just, first of all, I've met with many atheists who, when I taught to them, they were not really atheists. They were just agnostic.
That is also true. I've had similar experiences.
They were
yes.
rejecting organized religion.
Yes, yes, yes.
But when I introduced different beliefs that are more with the relationship with the earth, for example, more aligned with that, they really got it and they understood that. And I had very many spiritual conversations with many atheists that were really agnostics. But those who are truly agnostic, yes, there is something in the air, I feel, but personally, I don't know, I may be wrong, and I'm sure every single person has a different opinion, and you can talk with like 10 different atheists and they're going to tell you a completely different thing, is that they're going against the system. They're tired of the system. They're tired of the control that many religions have imposed on us for so many years. And that is a reaction to it. I could be wrong. I don't know. It's just where I'm coming from right now.
I guess I was thinking of something slightly different, where there's really disenchantment, whereby people, cannot think mythologically. But I guess this book might inspire a lot to try and break that spell. So, I want to thank you very, very much for sitting here with me underneath the temple of Athena. And we'll keep the conversation rolling. Thank you very much for watching. We do rely on the kindness of strangers, so please like, subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Thank you very, very much.
Thank
George,
you, Michael.
Thank you for your
Appreciate it.
honesty and truthfulness.
Thank you.